All right. Welcome, everyone, to all who might be watching. Thank you for tuning in. This is episode 2 of my series on eschatology, on the end times, and all other things that might pertain to it. Things, hopefully, that won't be too far over my own head to talk about. But, things philosophical as well as things historical, things biblical, hopefully mainly biblical. Um, can you hear me okay? Yeah, cool. So yes, currently my wife is listening just to the beginning, just to make sure that it all sounds okay and everything's working. We are also joined by my cat, who is here with us. Say hello. Meow meow. So she is joining us for the video as well. Um, Okay, so yes, let's get started. Let's jump right into it. Okay, so first on today's episode, we're going to be continuing off similar to last episode where we weren't quite going into, still sort of in the realm of the introduction. So this episode, hopefully, we're going to be going through two parts, possibly only one, and then I will have to change the thumbnail or just, I don't know how I'm going to do that. So hopefully, I'll try and get through some stuff a bit quicker this time. But yeah, so we're going to be going into a bit about myth and a bit about just trying to sort of philosophize or there's a word I'm looking for, just to kind of spitball a bit on philosophy and about what people believe and why they believe it. And it's something that I've thought a little bit about recently, with regard to. I'm not sure if I mentioned this last time. I think I'm mixing up the last video with the conversations I have with my wife. But yeah, so about why people believe the things they believe and how it's not necessarily always evidentially based. A lot of, I think, what we believe, I know I did mention this last episode, not only other people, but of course me included. I think this is a human, I wouldn't necessarily say problem, but a human, it could be a problem, but a human feat, a human tendency, and that's to kind of center yourself in a worldview, for whatever reason. It could be, I suppose, upbringing. Um, it could be your environment. It could be your own decision. But yeah, I think I don't really have any resources for this, but just with in terms of, like, I think a good question is, why do people become involved in cults? And something I've thought about, and why do people believe certain things about, I mentioned last episode about people who will only read the King James version of the Bible, the Middle English 16th century Bible, 16th or 17th, 16th century, I believe, Bible. And they'll swear by it, and it's not necessarily an evidentially based viewpoint or belief. I think it has a lot to do with a lot of rhetoric, a lot of talking points, and a lot of certain things that people really latch onto, and evidence. There's a guy on YouTube who does videos. I think his YouTube channel, believe, is Truth is Christ. It's also very hard for me to use my mouse because my cat is taking up all of the space on the mouse pad. But Truth is Christ. Hopefully it doesn't start playing. I think I've got it muted, desktop audio. But yeah, his videos that his evidence for, I can actually put him on here, not to name drop or anything like that. How do I'll have to copy it. But he, like, not to call anyone out or anything, but I guess if you're on public online, then I suppose you kind of, I'm sure if people disagree with me, they wouldn't hide it. But I'm mentioning a lot of things publicly, so there's no point in, like, you don't have to hide anything. Anyway, my point is, there's this guy on YouTube who we are going to um, have a look at, if I can figure out how to use, turn that off. Okay. So this is the guy, Truth is Christ. His arguments for why the King James version of the Bible is the only true translation is, I'll show you. Also, this is Mark Ward right here. Mark Ward is a big proponent of the biblical scholarship on translations, and I think he knows Greek and Hebrew, and he made a response to this guy, and this guy's making a response to him, but sinful to give KJV to children. So I wonder what that's about. That seems a pretty fascinating video, but let's go most popular, and we can see, this is a cool video, but this is sort of his arguments for why the KJV is the only true Bible translation. And I suppose this is an interesting thing to talk about. I don't think I'm going to get through the third part of today, but to talk about is the Bible itself. So as Christians, we believe that the Bible is infallible and perfect in its, well, not all Christians, but generally in its original manuscripts, in its original writing. So what the apostles wrote is perfect and without error. But of course, we don't have those original manuscripts. We have enough manuscripts, and like the Bible, it's a miracle that it survived the way it did in the environment that it was in, with a lot of the Roman government trying to destroy it, and a lot of persecution and all this stuff, and but it did survive, and it's a miracle that we have such a strong link, and we essentially know, it's not only that we know what the original apostles wrote, but we have the apostles and the disciples of the apostles, but we have an abundance where we actually have more than what they wrote. Anyway, I'm getting a bit off topic, but so this guy, his arguments are, because there's 77,777, something to do with that number in the first and last version of the King James Bibles. Jaw-dropping 666 discovery utterly proves the King James Bible is God's, I'm assuming that says word, and I'm assuming that has to do with a 666 verse or something. The 1611th mention of Lord, so the King James Version was written in 1611, which would be the 17th century, so I did get it wrong. And why it's a really big deal, which again would prove the King James Version. The Elton anomaly, 7 to the power of 7, we counted the entire Bible. So it just has to do with numbers and not necessarily any historical scholarship or really much of all of anything. It has a lot to do with, it's kind of like the claim of Islam, where the claim is that the Quran is shown to be God's word through its poetry and its poeticness, which isn't a very good argument for saying this is the true and perfect word of God, and it's only because it's poetic. Because the Quran, unlike the Bible, doesn't claim any miracles. It doesn't claim any prophecy. I think it does for some things. Like one of the prophecies is like the world will end shortly after it was written, which it didn't, unless, I don't know. Which is also what I'm trying to discuss in my one, how the Christians also claim a similar thing, which is okay. It's a matter of interpretation, I suppose, but if it's an error in the Quran that Muhammad said that that the world was about to end, and we're, what would it be, 1400 years after Muhammad, and the world still hasn't ended, and then Christians will make a similar argument if you are premillennial, and sort of pre-trib, and the world's about to end. And if you believe that, because you rely on the verses that say things like in Revelation, things that are soon to happen, and how the world's about to end. So yeah, Um, so that's just a point that I was trying to make. So yeah, so going back to that, so that's an example of what I'm talking about. But how people will believe in, people become Muslims, people will be vehemently atheist, and to its core, people will be opposed to Christianity. People will become Buddhist and Hinduist. And Mike Winger has a really interesting story about a guy he spoke to who was an atheist. He didn't believe in God, um, or he didn't. He might not have been an atheist. I think he might have been an agnostic or something. Believed in God but wasn't a Christian. Um, and Mike Winger gave him, all of the Christian apologetics of the historicity of the Bible and of Christianity, and the apostles and the writings of the apostles, and the fact that Christians, it was a Jewish thing that then became a Gentile thing, which is just to say a non-Jewish thing, like and the prophecies of Jesus, and then also the claims of all his early disciples and the apostles, how Jesus rose from the dead. What was I saying? Oh yeah. So anyway, you don't have to rewind it, but I completely lost my train of thought. Um, so anyway, um, something about the Quran and Islam, but yeah, people believe things they believe. I think not necessarily based on I think I was talking about Christians believe the end of the world's about to happen, but anyway, yeah. So my perspective is that a lot of what people believe isn't necessarily based on evidence. It's based on where you see yourself in the world. Oh, yeah. So the story of Mike Winger and his friend, and how he gave him all the apologetic arguments for Christianity. And there's a lot of weight behind a lot of these arguments. Obviously, that's why, a lot of people become Christians. It's not empty belief or a false empty faith. It's a faith based on evidence, but it's not based on, obviously, like, if there was enough evidence where you didn't need faith, then God wouldn't call us to have faith. And I think that's the beautiful thing. Not to say that there isn't enough evidence, but yeah, it's a fascinating thing. There's enough evidence, but again, you do have to choose, and there is a heart problem there as well. So, but that's getting more into the philosophy of Christianity, and less so about post-millennial eschatology. But so yeah, and anyway, so he gave him all. Mike Winger gave this guy all his apologetic arguments. The guy said to him, "Look, there's just not enough evidence for me to believe, believe in Christianity, to believe in Jesus. There's not enough evidence." And Mike Winger said, "Okay." Okay. Well, he said, "Well, what do you believe then?" And the guy said, "Well, I believe in reincarnation, and that, there's an endless cycle of birth and rebirth," or something along those lines. And Mike Winger said to him, "Well, what's your evidence for that?" And he said, "Oh, I suppose I don't have any." And it's just a good example of people believe things more or less because they want to, and because it fits their worldview and their place in the world. And that's a huge thing with what we believe. It fits our place in the world. So if we don't if if you don't believe in something, it makes it hard to have, to place yourself in the world's a big place. There's a lot of things going on, and yeah, to believe in something is to kind of ground yourself in the world, in the chaotic world. And so there is an evidential debate, which is again the whole debate between atheists and Christians and Muslims. But again, it then tends to become very philosophical at points, and getting into sort of science and the scientific method. A lot of the world we live in is very it's a miracle that that the universe began in and of itself, and then life as well. So you do more or less have to pick a side and pick a point, whether you believe, whether you're an atheist or um, you're agnostic or whether you're Christian. At the end of the day, you do have to pick what you're going to choose. And a lot of these have big consequences. A lot of beliefs have had consequences historically. That's something I want to try and get into about the historicity or the history of Christianity in the world, and the apologetics is the defense of Christianity, or let me Google that actually. Apologetics definition. Reasoned arguments or writings in justification of something, typically a theory or religious doctrine. So yeah, apologetics. So anyway, let's get started. So that's the brief introduction of what we're going to get into today. What I'm going to try and get into is myth is the first part, and then hopefully a bit of the Bible verses about why the end times had to take place and what they are. Sort of just unraveling. I think a lot of people who aren't Christian have a rough idea of what the end times are, or sort of possibly, and then Christians as well have a rough idea of what the end times are, but there is a lot of that people believe, and so I want to try and kind of unravel a lot of the external layers, because a lot of what we can believe, like I mentioned in that first video about that book, the book with the crazy title and the crazy description about the coming post-human apocalypse, and all of that stuff. There's a lot of you could call it fluff. It's probably not a very nice term, but there's a lot of weeds, I suppose, or a lot of makes it sound like I'm being a my view only supremacist, but there's a lot of mist, I suppose, around all of this stuff, and it's hard to sometimes see clearly. So we're going to hopefully go to the Bible verses and just get an understanding of where some of this stuff comes from, and what the core components are. So yeah, that's hopefully what I'm going to be doing today. Hopefully going to speed through it a little bit. So my first point is, again, to talk about myth, and sort of about Christianity as the ultimate myth. I think I should get through this bit a little bit quickly, but I did have another example as well about C.S. Lewis. Now, if you don't know, C.S. Lewis is the author of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, a book which I haven't read, but a movie adaptation which most people would have seen or at least heard of, but I'm assuming most people who watch this video would have seen it, which is Narnia. So the author of the book, which was adapted into the movie Narnia, his name is C.S. Lewis. Now, I'm not sure if what he did before he became a Christian. I think he was a writer. So I believe he would have been a writer because he was friends with J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote the books, the Lord of the Rings books. Now, they were best friends, I believe, and J.R.R. Tolkien was a devout Catholic, and a lot of his writings with the Lord of the Rings were very religiously influenced, and yeah, it's very cool. Again, I haven't even watched the Lord of the Rings or read the books, so again, I'm no expert on those things. But yeah, I do have an interesting article about how J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of the Lord of the Rings books, and C.S. Lewis, the author of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which became the movie Narnia, how J.R.R. Tolkien influenced C.S. Lewis in becoming a Christian. And he did it mainly through... It had to do with a discussion about myth, which was a really cool thing. I do have an article. I will show everyone the article. So this is the article. I don't want to read all of it. It's going to take me too long, but um, yeah, I'm just going to read all of it because I've read part of it, but I don't reckon. Anyway, so shortly before he was admitted to Oxford University in 1916 to study English literature, C.S. Lewis, a recent convert to atheism, got into an argument with a friend about Christianity and its supernatural elements. His letters on the topic during this period reveal the spirit of the age, a disposition against religious belief. It has found many allies over the last century. That was really big in New Atheism as well. I can't go over all of it. It's going to take me too long. Here we go. 15 years later, however, Lewis, by then an Oxford scholar in English literature, abandoned his atheism and embraced historic Christianity. He went on to become the 20th century's most celebrated Christian author. His works of apologetics, such as Mere Christianity and The Problem of Pain, have never gone out of print. His children's series, The Chronicles of Narnia, awash in biblical imagery, has been translated into more than 47 languages. Ironically, it was an argument over mythology about the meaning of myth in human experience that brought Lewis around. On September 19, 1931, in what might rank as one of the most important conversations in literary history, Lewis took his friend and colleague J.R.R. Tolkien on a walk along the River Sherwell near Magdalen College. A professor of Anglo-Saxon at Oxford, Tolkien had been studying ancient and medieval mythologies for decades. He had begun writing his own epic mythology about Middle-earth while he was a soldier in France during World War I. As Lewis recounted the conversation in his autobiography, Surprised by Joy, Tolkien insisted that myths were not falsehoods but rather imitations of a concrete spiritual reality. Jack, when you meet a god sacrificing himself in a pagan story, you like it very much. You are mysteriously moved by it, Tolkien said. Lewis agreed. Tales of sacrifice and heroism stirred up within him a sense of longing, but not when he encountered them in the Gospels. The pagan stories, Tolkien insisted, are God expressing himself through the minds of poets. They are splintered fragments of a much greater story. The account of Christ and his death and resurrection is a kind of myth, he explained. It works on our imagination in much the same way as all other myths, with this difference: it really happened. Perhaps only Tolkien, with his immense intelligence and creativity, could have persuaded Lewis that his reason and imagination might become allies in the act of faith. Lewis's objections melted away like ants into a furnace. The old myth of the dying God, without ceasing to be myth, comes down from the heaven of legend and imagination to the earth of history, he wrote after his conversion. We must not be ashamed of the mythical radiance resting on our theology. Then he goes to talk about how something about evidence and modern science and psychology. But yeah, that quote as well about how it does talk about somehow where as well. Yeah, this bit here, how Tolkien says that the myths of the pagan stories are splintered fragments of a much greater story. Yes? Oh, sorry. Oh, yep. The account of Christ and his death and resurrection is a kind of myth, he explained. It works on our imagination in much the same way as other myths, with this difference: it really happened. So that's the fascinating thing about Christianity, and that's when you look at people like Jordan Peterson, and I believe there's others. There's also an episode of the Justin Brierley's surprising rebirth of belief in God, which he goes into this, and he also makes a really interesting. Justin Brierley also makes a really interesting comment about where were we? So there's an episode. Let's stop that. So there's an episode here on Justin Brierley's podcast. It's this one, number 9. Paul Kingsnorth and Martin Shaw, a poet and mythologist convert. So essentially, they become Christians, but neither of them were Christian to begin with. They were um, they were really into, well, a poet and a mythologist, and they convert to Christianity through not necessarily the historical evidence, although that is a massive part of Christianity. It doesn't exist without, people didn't die for the beauty of the Christian myth. They died because they genuinely believed that Christ had died and come back from the dead. And not hundreds of years later either, but within the lifetime of the Jesus and the witnesses of Jesus, the disciples and the apostles. Um, However, when people like Jordan Peterson and these two guys as well read the biblical stories, they're blown away. And that's why there's a lot of people who are drawn to Christianity through people like Peterson. But again, you can't, Christianity doesn't exist without the death of, or the blood of the martyrs who it was built upon. So, yeah. Now, yeah, I thought that would just be an interesting thing. Yeah, I've covered that point. Now, there was something I wanted to talk about, which I didn't get any resources for. So, forgive me if I get something wrong, but there's a really interesting historical moment about with Iceland. So Iceland, yeah, okay, here it is. I can show you all. So in Iceland, this is a part of my notes. In Iceland, in the summer of the year 1000 AD, the General Assembly of Iceland voted to convert to Christianity. The basis for this decision was political rather than religious, as it was to prevent civil dissension. So essentially what happened, so Nick Needham mentions this in his book, 2000 Years of Christ's Power. I believe it's in volume 2, the medieval ages or the Middle Ages. So essentially there's a convert or a missionary who goes to Iceland, and Iceland is not a Christian nation. They're a pagan nation with pagan, I got to turn this down a bit because it's clipping a little bit when I talk too loud. I could probably get a bit closer to the mic and talk a bit quieter. But essentially, so I'm just working out the volume as I go, so hopefully it doesn't get too quiet by anything. It's good. I'm just turning it down, because I don't want it to clip when it gets too loud. But yeah, essentially, a missionary goes to Iceland. I got to do this thing where I swallow and then go. But anyway, it might be a bit gross, but it's just, anyway, I get off topic sometimes, but so there's a missionary who goes to Iceland and essentially does what a missionary does, preaches the gospel, the good news, preaches about Jesus and the church and his church in Iceland. And what happens is, so the General Assembly of Iceland voted to convert to Christianity. So democratically, the General Assembly, so like the government of Iceland gets together and they take a vote on which religion the whole country is going to choose to be. And it's a very fascinating thing. Nick Needham mentions in his book how the book's about church history as well, like the book mentioned with Nick Needham. So he mentions how it seems foreign to us today because we live in a religiously plural society. You can be atheist, you can be Muslim, you can be a Christian, you can be a non-Trinitarian Christian, you can be a Gnostic, you can be an Arian, you can be all different kinds of Christian heretics and not be put to death, which is a beautiful thing and is a really fascinating thing in church history, how not only did the Catholics practice that, but also the Protestants practice that as well. Like Protestants didn't necessarily practice it, but Calvin himself approved the death of some guy, some heretic going around talking about how Jesus wasn't God. He did want him to not be burnt at the stake, to have a more peaceful or less painful death, but nonetheless he did still approve that because people, even in the 16th century, even the Protestants had this view that the government should enforce the hegemony and oneness of society Very fascinating thing, because obviously the Catholics persecuted heretics for a really long time, and it's something that, we can look back on and be like, well, that wasn't very good, especially as Protestants. But Protestants, like, there was an understanding back then where the government just, like, religion and um, religion and myth and sort of church and state wasn't separate. I think that doesn't really begin globally until you have the Renaissance and then the Enlightenment, and then you start to see that take place, whereas that was historically not really the case. So yeah. So anyway, back to Iceland. The General Assembly, they picked this one guy. It's like a sage. He's like a sage of Iceland, and they pick him and essentially say, we want you to decide. So he goes away for 30 days. And again, forgive me if I get something wrong. It's been a while since I listened to the audiobook. Although it was only a couple months ago, so it's still fresh on my mind. But they had a sage go away for like 30 days, and he, was very well versed in the ancient religion of Iceland, and also very well versed in in what understanding Christianity. And he comes back after 30 days and goes, okay, I've decided that Christianity is the better way. It's the better religion. We're going to become Christian. And then so I think they must vote or something, and they vote that Iceland will become Christian, and everyone accepts it. And, yeah, again, Nick Needham says, like, it's foreign to us, but the reason why they did that was because they understood back then that for the hegemony of society, people had to believe the same thing. You couldn't have two competing myths, because myths determine your place in reality. They determine right and wrong. They determine who you are, whether you're right or wrong, or whether you're good or bad, or whether you're fulfilling a greater purpose. And so, yeah, it's a very fascinating thing. So yeah, that's that part. I also have, so I've covered that bit about the Paul King's Northern Martin Shore. That was this episode here, episode 9. Very interesting episode as well. It's not really necessarily an evidential take on Christianity. And Tom Holland, I think, has a similar one where, he was really interested in history, and about all the ancient myths and all the ancient things about history and the Roman Empire and all these things. But he wasn't necessarily interested in Christianity. But then he started to study it more later on in his life because he was raised a Christian, and starts to realize, wow, this is a really fascinating story. But the most fascinating part is that it's probably true. And also, it's completely changed the world. Like, when you study history, not just for a specific purpose, but just generally study history, and let it tell you what is truth, you understand that Christianity really changed the world, fundamentally changed the world, and for the better. People could disagree, but the early Christianity got rid of slavery in most of the world, and then in the when it kicked back up again, slavery was mostly gone, especially in the Western world, in the Christian world, up until the transatlantic slave trade. But then it was a lot of, I think, I don't know which historian says it, but he says the miracle of it's Christianity, or the miracle of Christianity, or the American church, is that you have the Black American church, because a lot of the slave owners used Christianity to defend their rights to own slaves. Again, it's a very fascinating conversation. But they used it to defend slavery. But then what they would do is they would take out, I think it was like 70% of the Bible, because they didn't want any, they didn't want the Exodus story about, the freedom of Israel in slavery in Egypt, and when they cross through the Red Sea, and Moses parts the sea and they go through. They didn't want things like this. There's also, New Testament verses that talk about how, because back when Christianity came onto the scene, slavery was a fundamental part of every society in the world. And so you have verses talking about Christian slave owners and Christian slaves, and how, the Christian, that's not it's not your property anymore. It's now your brother, and he's not your lord anymore, your slave lord. He's your brother, and so it's like it just changes the scene. And when you look at Roman history, Rome, like slaves and freemen, or slaves and the free, which is why Paul says in Galatians, is now no longer slave nor free, male nor female, Jew nor Greek. It was because these things were, slave nor free. So there's a interesting quote by quote. I just need to check, make sure this isn't clipping, but there's an interesting quote by I think it's Aristotle and Plato. I don't have the quote with me, unfortunately. I mentioned it in an episode I did with Dylan in the book, but I don't know where the book is. But it's about Aristotle and Plato make it's essentially about the inherent, how some people are born into slavery and some people are born free, some people are born slave. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, yeah. So, oh, wait. Is this? Why isn't this popped up? Oh, okay. Okay. So I will just show this. I feel like in Joe Rogan podcast, there's so many tabs in Jamie's thing after he's done. But this one. So Aristotle, for that some should rule and others be ruled is a thing not only necessary but expedient. So I don't even know what this word means. I think it means inherent, convenient and practical, although possibly improper or immoral. A means of attaining an end, especially one that is convenient, but possibly improper or immoral. So, again, I don't really know what that word means, but from the hour of their birth, some are marked out for subjection, others for rule. So, this is what Aristotle's an ancient Greek philosopher, one of the great ones, Plato and Aristotle, the two great ones. Plato believed, here we go. Nature herself intimates that it is just for the better to have more than the worse. The more powerful than the weaker, and in many ways she shows among men as well as among animals, and indeed among whole cities and races, that justice consists in the superior ruling over and having more than the inferior. So Plato and Aristotle, and here's one about how Homer writes a similar thing. Oh, this is interesting. Oh, wow. So Augustine's view that slavery was natural. So this, again, that's a fascinating thing because, anyway, that's fascinating because he's a Christian, but again, it says he didn't believe it was, um, uh, like a good thing, but it was a cause of being in a fallen world, which is very fascinating. And now we can see, I do go into a bit of, what's his name? Augustine's, that book, The City of God. I haven't read it again, but I go into a bit of the Britannica article about Augustine's City of God, and how he believed the end times would play out in the rest of the world. But again, I forgot what I was talking about. Oh yeah, so about how Christianity completely changed the Roman world. And when you study history, you see these things, and Tom Holland would have seen that because he was very fascinating in the Roman world. And so, yeah, Christianity it broke apart the institution of slavery to the point now where we don't have it. And yeah, so the Black Church is a fascinating thing because there's one, Justin Brierley, again, it's always Justin Brierley. It's either Justin Brierley or Glenn Scrivener, but I'm pretty sure it's Justin Brierley, talks about, he does an interview about slavery. No, this one is Glenn Scrivener's book. He does an interview about slavery. Not an interview. He has a chapter on slavery. Glenn Scrivener in his book, The Air We Breathe, about there's a Christian who was a slave during the time of the slave trade in America. Oh, I pat the cat. And how that slave leaves his Christian master, slave owner, who was horrible to him as they were in America in the era of slavery. but he becomes a Christian, and he eventually, as a free man, goes back to his where he was a slave and talks to the guy, and it's just a fascinating story. But he becomes one of the most becomes a very devout Christian, and it's because he reads the Bible and he sees that um, he was being mistreated based on what the Christian standards are for him as a believer and the slave owner, and it's wrong what he did, and it's just a really fascinating thing. And I think it's Glenn Scrivener who makes that point, how the black church in America is a miracle in and of itself, because Christianity was used to defend um, slavery. So you wouldn't expect the people who were former slaves to come out and then adopt the religion that was used to justify their enslavement. And again, like, it was wrong that it was used to justify their enslavement. But yeah, it's a fascinating thing. Okay, so that's essentially about the power of myth. About why we believe what we believe, and yeah. So I did want to go into a bit of Augustine's eschatology. So Saint Augustine is an early church father. So he was post Constantine. So once the Roman Emperor Constantine becomes a Christian, and he makes it legal for Christianity, and now you can be a Christian in Rome without fearing horrible persecution. Augustine pops up as a theologian, one of the greatest theologians to have ever lived. And he has a take on eschatology, because in his time, there were people who were attributing, so very early on within Christianity, there were people who were, shall we just read the article together? So, let me go here. So, this is one I read already last episode with you all. So during the first 100 years of Christian history, the church taught some form of millenarianism or chiliasm, from the Greek word for 1000. The belief that the parousia, which is the return of the physical return of Jesus Christ to earth, would bring about a 1,000-year kingdom of fellowship, justice, peace, and abundance here on earth. The coincidence of occasional episodes, is that the same word as coincidence? But coincidence and coincidence, they're spelled the same, but like they're pronounced differently. No, I think it's true, but it's fascinating. So the coincidence, is that how you say it when you mean it that way? Yeah. Okay, so the coincidence of occasional episodes of millennial exaltation and persecution, example about 200, which I believe was a period of very horrible Christian persecution, suggests the existence of a relationship between apocalyptic expectations and imperial persecutions. Certainly, Revelation viewed martyrdom and millennial promises as two aspects of the same eschatological resolution, but apocalyptic zeal waned because the end never came and the pressure of persecution was intermittent. So essentially, this apocalyptic zeal, which was a belief that Jesus was about to come back very soon, and then the 1,000 years kingdom, which is so essentially such a deep topic. I think I didn't know when I started this series, it was meant to be one episode, and I wasn't going to plan it. I was just going to wing it. And then I did a lot of planning, and now there's on my Google Doc, there's 7 sections, and it takes me like an hour and a half just to get through one. And it's very it's a lot of work doing a podcast, or just even making these videos. But I mean, it's worth it. It's just very like in the back of my mind, I just started playing this game called Satisfactory, which is like a game about building a factory, and it's really fun. But I know this is like this is more important and this is better. but it's just like there's two wolves inside of me. No, just kidding. There's like the Holy Spirit and then my own desires. But anyway, let's take a drink break. Cat cam while I drink. Meow. Oh, they can probably hear me just gulping. Are you posting it to Facebook? I already did it. You should have done it earlier.
I actually forgot to do it.
Oh, okay. Drink break over. Oh, here we go. All right, continuing on the video from where I left off. So let's go back. Oh yeah. So this whole thing about the 1,000-year reign of Christ. So actually, maybe I should sit up more because I think oh, I shouldn't really be adjusting the microphone halfway through a video, but so oh, that might be better actually. Although I hope this isn't making a lot of noise as I bang the mic around, but so okay, so essentially oh it's a very real video. Oh, there she is. Meow meow. I suppose this is halfway through the video, so it's a good time for me to do this. I hope I wasn't like extremely engaging and interrupting, but yeah. When we talk about this stuff, here, let me go back to it. Segue that. So this 1,000 1,000-year kingdom, there's a Bible verse in Revelation that talks about how Jesus will return and reign for 1,000 years. Now, a lot of the debate between the end times is how that happens. So there's been a long debate about whether that's a literal 1,000 years or not. The book of Revelation itself is filled with a lot of symbolism. And so the views of people like me and other people is that 1,000 years isn't a literal 1,000 years. And it's a common view, but there is also, of course, like this is saying right here, that very early on people were taking that literally and believing that it was going to literally happen very soon. And it wasn't. It was a very realized sort of literal thing where like Jesus was about to come back, and then like everything, like, and then he would when he would come back, like, and there's verses that like when you read them that way, it does make them sound like that, or does come across that way, which is why it is why there's a massive debate over it. It's not like there's a lot to it, this debate. But okay, so that aside, so that's what that talk about 1,000-year kingdom is about. Yeah, so here, apocalyptic zeal waned. So he's talking about how this view, millenarianism or Chiliasm, which is the view that Jesus was going to return soon and then the 1,000-year reign would begin. That's what that's talking about. I'm going to turn this up a little bit because it might be a bit quiet. Yeah, so that's what that was talking about. I got to turn it down again because that's a bit too loud. So that's what that was oh, that's too loud again. So that's what that was talking about. But they say that apocalyptic zeal waned because the end never came and the pressure of persecution was intermittent. So the persecution of Christians in the Roman Empire wasn't consistent in the sense that it was consistent, but it wasn't one straight line of persecution. It tended to go up, like up. Oh, where's the camera? Up and down. It tended to go up and down, and had a lot to do with like paranoia and what do you call it? What's that word where paranoia and that where people spiritualize things is a word for it. Where you're like paranoid about spiritual, like, you can't. You can't. I have examples, but I don't want to call someone out. You know, like when you can't do something late at night because you're worried that you're gonna invite a demon in. What's that called?
You talking about sleep paralysis?
No, like like it's paranoia about when you can't do certain things because like certain things will happen, but there's no evidence.
Superstition?
Superstition. They were very superstitious about Christians. Well, off she goes. Very superstitious about Christians because you know, they weren't serving the ancient gods, and so when there would be droughts or famines or things like that, they would just be like, it's the Christians because and Wes Huff talks about this on the Joe Rogan podcast. The Romans would then be like, okay, well, what do we do? Well, we have to murder all the Christians and persecute them to appease the gods because, which is a very fascinating thing. So that's what it's talking about. Apocalyptic zeal waned. So that would come and go because the end never came and the pressure of persecution was intermittent. Moreover, in the aftermath of apocalyptic outbreaks, I have to really try hard to adjust this mic. I don't want it to be too quiet, but I don't want it to be too loud. More responsible and well-connected members of the church pursued a policy of accommodation, insisting that Christians were not hostile to Rome and downplaying both the apocalyptic and millennial dimensions of their tradition. Christian missionaries converted large numbers of Roman citizens, and worldly cess and the failure of apocalyptic expectation reduced Christian antagonism towards the empire. It's a fascinating thing going on in Rome. Like most of Christian history, not to like disclude or exclude all of Christian history post Roman Empire, but it's very fascinating sort of, you know, the first 600 years of Christianity, and especially the first few hundred years. So there is another view which we talked about last time, so I'm not going to read too much because but there was another view essentially where I'm just going to talk about this one off the cuff because I talked about it last time and I don't want to go over the same things like every time. So essentially there was another view that the Roman Empire was the kingdom of God. So instead of it being Jesus was going to return and this world is the enemy and then Jesus is going to return and then his kingdom's going to be fulfilled when he returns, it was more or less that that the kingdom of God was being fulfilled within the Roman Empire. And I think this is a fascinating thing that like the apocalyptic stuff where like people like the end of the world is right around the corner because of all this persecution probably happened before Constantine, but then after Constantine, people started attributing the kingdom of God to the Roman Empire because now you have Constantine, who's a Christian emperor. And, you know, for the most part, the evidence suggests that he was likely a genuine Christian. He became a Christian. I think he first made Christianity legal because he was seeking a tolerance, and he was seeking to. Every time I look at the camera, it throws me off. But he was seeking tolerance within the empire because before him, a lot of the emperors were pretty bad people, and I think he wanted to be a bit better. And he was also like, he was monogamous, which was not particularly common, but he believed in like, you know, sort of one wife, whereas most of the Roman emperors had a cohort of wives and, you know, concubines and things like that. He seeked a policy of religious tolerance and just trying to be a bit better. And then after that, he actually converts to Christianity, which is a fascinating thing. And yeah, the evidence is that he wasn't doing it, he wasn't faking it, but he was really doing it because there wasn't anything to, especially like because he'd already made Christianity legal, there wasn't anything for him to gain becoming a Christian, and in fact, there was things for him to lose, because the Roman empires thought that Christianity was foolish. Now, again, Wes Huff covers this in the Joe Rogan podcast, but there's a piece of graffiti, one of the earliest Christian images that we have is a piece of graffiti in Rome, called the it's like the Alexamenos graffitos or something. So it's essentially a piece of graffiti where this guy is mocking his friend Alexamenos, because in the photo, Jamie, can you pull that up? So I'm gonna pull it up. Yeah, the Alexamenos graffito. So, thanks, Jamie. So essentially, what it is it's this image, which is carved into like some wall or something in where is it? The Palatine Hill in Rome. Often said to be the earliest depiction of Jesus, the graffito is difficult to date, but has been estimated to have been made about the year 200. The image seems to show a young man worshipping a crucified, donkey-headed figure. The Greek inscription approximately translates to Alexamenos worships God, or Alexamenos worships his God, indicating that the graffito was apparently meant to mock a Christian named Alexamenos, so probably his friend, or maybe just not his friend. But this is when they trace it, it was like it didn't make sense to worship a guy who was crucified, and Wes Huff goes through this um in his episode with Joe Rogan. Like when you read people like Josephus, he's an ancient Jewish historian, sort of after the fall of Jerusalem. You also have Tacitus, who's an ancient Roman historian. I think he writes also after the fall of Jerusalem. But these people had no issue in putting supernatural events in their histories because the ancient peoples had no issue with supernatural events. People nowadays, when you talk about a guy rising from the dead and performing miracles, it's all, well, that can't be true because miracles don't happen. And again, you get into the apologetics for, the Big Bang Theory in and itself is a miracle because you have an uncaused cause. Unless you go back to infinite regression, which again, for the most part, those are theories. The evidence suggests that the universe had a beginning, as far as we know. Now, you can, again, data and evidence, you can always interpret them in such a way that, I guess that's, again, what I'm talking about mythology. People want to believe what they want to believe, but the fact that we exist is a miracle. You also got the fine tuning of the universe and the fine tuning of biology, which essentially, I don't know heaps about it, but it's essentially the fact that when you study evolution, the fact of how, and something that makes some biologists and scientists convert to theism and then by extent Christianity is how complex biology is. And it's the thing of what do you call it? Mitosis, I believe. But I think it's more than that. It's DNA and the cell replication process and the evolution. There's also I think there's some people who have talked about, I think it's in Justin Briley's podcast about I think it's the one that has to do with DNA. Oh cool. The new one's coming soon. Season 2 is coming soon. Oh, I'm not even on this. Oh, did I even show the Alexamenos graffito stuff? Oh, I don't know. Anyway, this is what I was talking about if I didn't show it. So, guy, this is a crucified, there's a cross. There's a guy crucified with a donkey head. And there's this guy worshipping him. And then this is the writing says Alexamenos worships his god. I hope I included that. But there is an episode. It might be this one, The Believing Brain. It might be this one, The Logos Behind Life, the dissident scientist discovering a mind beyond matter. But there's an episode where he talks about biology, and it's essentially like one of the guys argues that cell replication itself is a conscious act. It's either guided by consciousness, as in like the body that the cells embody guides the consciousness, or the cells themselves are conscious, and that influences how they divide and progress and evolve, which is a fascinating thing. Again, above my pay grade. There's I heard it in one of Justin Briley's because he doesn't just talk about all this stuff. It's not just some guy who makes all these claims. He interviews a lot of professionals, and he spent his whole life bringing on people who have got who are scientists and philosophers, and but a lot of scientists and a lot of theologians, and just a lot of debate and stuff. So it's very fascinating. But so aside from the supernatural, the ancients believed in the supernatural. Alexamenos worships his god. The ancient graffiti. Where was I? On a tangent again. How long's it been? I gotta end this soon. 1 hour. Um, okay. So anyway, Alexamenos worships his god. Um, I was on eschatology. Oh yeah, how the Christians changed the Roman Empire. So yeah, that guy who made that graffiti, and Constantine and something about that. But yeah, so slavery. There was also a lot of infanticide in the Roman Empire. People used to have babies, and if they were girls, they would, well, more often than not, when they were girls, not necessarily when they were boys, they would take them and leave them on top of rubbish dumps and just leave them out to die because they didn't want them. And their philosophy, I believe, um, I think they spoke about it in the podcast too, that what the ancient Romans used to believe is that, well, they're not actually killing them. So they're leaving it up to the gods and to divine fate and divine intervention, which, again, with our understanding, that's a horrible thing. But again, it comes down to what do we believe and why do we believe it. And a lot of what we believe about how each human being is born with dignity, you don't have that in any culture outside of Christianity. It doesn't exist. Even in something like Buddhism, or Hinduism, you have the karmic cycles, and the karmic cycles essentially say that people aren't born equal because um, some people are born worse off than others because they've done worse things in their past life, and that is not equality. Where equality comes from is the idea of the imago Dei, which is the image. It's I believe, the Greek words, which we translate. Again, the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, but the image of God. So the very first book of the Bible, the creation narrative and the creation account, which God gives to us, is that we are born in His image. We are made in His image, and therefore every person deserves equal rights to life. Not that everyone, um, some people forfeit. This is controversial, but some people forfeit their right to life. Well, it's not controversial actually. People will, I think everyone will agree with me. But when certain people do certain things, you then forfeit your right to live. For example, if somebody threatens you, um, with your life, somebody threatens your life, you have a right to defend your life, and that entails you forfeiting their life. And this is, that. So that's doesn't necessarily. Although we're all made in the image of God and we all deserve a right to life, that doesn't mean that that right is that you can do whatever you want. And that's a fascinating thing. And that's when we get into morals and laws and who do we protect? Why do we protect them? We need to, protecting the vulnerable, protecting the innocent, helping the poor, helping the sick, helping the, disabled, and things like this. But a lot of that also comes from Christianity, and you have hospitals popping up, and early Christian hospitals popping up, where the goal is mainly to heal the sick and the poor, and it's a fascinating. Not that there weren't hospitals, because there was before Christianity. Let's not attribute too much to Christianity. But yeah. So infanticide, slavery, and a lot of these things, they're not little things. They were deeply ingrained into the Roman world and the rest of the world as well. And by Muhammad's time, more or less the world, the modern, well, not modern world, but the established world, from the western ends of the Mediterranean to far into the east, of Europe, is Christian. You have the Western Church, the Latin speaking church, which later becomes the papacy, and then you have the Eastern Greek speaking Orthodox Church. Essentially is everything, like every place that is something, like is Christian, and also all the places that aren't something. After the 6th century, things get a bit more complicated with Muhammad coming onto the scene, but yeah. So yeah, so you have two. Back to the early church and what they believed. You have two views. You have you have more than two views, but the main two views are one that it's a very apocalyptic view. So if we go back up, this one here, the apocalyptic zeal, which waned because the end never came. And then you also have, you do have people attributing days to thousands of years and things like that, which people still do nowadays. But then you also have what I read last time, which is this thing here. Is this it? Anti-millennial political theology, climax with the conversion of Constantine the Great and the adoption of Christianity as a favored and eventually sole religion of the empire. So millennial doctrines. So yeah, this is a fascinating thing. And then we get into so you essentially have two views: millennialism, anarchistic variety of millennialism, and the hierarchical authoritarian kind of eschatology. Two views, mainly one, everything's crazy and chaotic and Jesus is about to return and it's apocalyptic, and then the second one, which is that the kingdom is fulfilled and established within the Roman Empire, because again, you have the emperor becomes Christian, which is crazy. Like, it's when you study history, like, that's wild. But it happened. I didn't study history, but I mean, I just read some books and stuff. But yeah. So that's a little bit about the early church, and the early views of the end times and the end of the world. I am on my last point. No. I'm on my second last point. And then we get into a little bit of Augustine. So, nope, wrong one. Augustine. So, after that, we get into Augustine's beliefs about the end. So, from about AD 400 onward, Augustine attacked not only the popular anarchistic variety of millennialism that his fellow church fathers reviled, but also the hierarchical authoritarian kind that Eusebius and others so ardently embraced. He did so by presenting history. How does this sound? It sounds alright, I imagine. I think it looks like it sounds okay. Yep. Authoritarian kind. Can I actually bring this out? No. No, I can't. Can I? No. Okay, that's fine. It'd just be good to see the audio levels on my other screen. But from about AD 400 onward, Augustine is attacking not only the anarchistic variety of millennialism, which again is, the apocalyptic stuff that, you see a lot of people, people sort of do that now as well. But also the hierarchical authoritarian kind that Eusebius and others so ardently embrace, which is, I think, something we're beginning to see a little bit of now as well, which is realized eschatology and sort of, I forget what it's called, but it's like that, the kind of government has to submit, which it does has to submit to Christ as Lord, but the government isn't the fulfillment of the Christian kingdom. It is subject to Christ, who is Lord, who is reigning in the kingdom, and the kingdom is coming down as a bride adorned. No, that's the church. The kingdom is coming down out of heaven, and it's being fulfilled, but it's not through a specific government or something. It's fulfilled through, I don't know. It's like spiritual. That's my best answer. Hope that helps. But Augustine, I think, tries to explain something like that. I don't know. I'm not trying to attribute that Augustine believes exactly what I believed, but his view is very fascinating. So let's read on. He did so by presenting history as operating in two different realms, the heavenly and the terrestrial, outlined in his treatise, The City of God. So that's his book. I don't know why it's called a treatise. A systematic exposition or argument in writing, including a methodical discussion of the facts and principles involved and conclusions reached. So here we go. So that's his treatise, The City of God. That's the famous Augustinian book, or famous Augustine's famous book. The heavenly city, the expression of spiritual perfection and union with God, was not visible to those still in the terrestrial city, where good and evil continued to coexist in a single body. So, heavenly city, the expression of spiritual perfection and union with God, was not visible to those still in the terrestrial city, where good and evil continued to coexist in a single body. So it's kind of like Jesus' parables about, the wheat and the tares being in one, which you can attribute to Jerusalem and Israel before the fall in 70 AD. How you had the Christians and the unrepentant Jews, the persecuting Jews. Most of the Christians in Jerusalem would have been Jews, and then you also have the non-Christian Jews. So it's not like you have non-Jews and Jews. I'm not, it's not an anti-Semitic Jews suck kind of thing. It's a Jews versus Jews kind of thing. It's like a like a in-house family debate kind of thing that, like, let's not try and get too anti-Semitic about it. But anyway, just some commentary there. So yeah, the heavenly city, and this reminds me of that verse by Jesus, how the kingdom is not something that can be pointed to or touched, and I think, looking at that verse, you would have seemed like when the people were saying that, like, the Roman Empire was the Christian kingdom. That's the kingdom prophesied and is fulfilled through the Roman Empire, like literally with Constantine as its head. It's like, well, hey, Jesus said you can't see it, you can't point to it, you can't touch it, you can't point to the Roman Empire and be like, oh, it's there, that's it. So maybe that's what Augustine. Anyway, it doesn't mean anyway. Let's continue reading. Millennial perfection could not be achieved in this world. Only at God's promised climax to history, at the very end of the terrestrial world of time and space, would good and evil be separated. Until that unknowable time, humanity lived in the saeculum, Latin word for age. An opaque, I think that's the word that we get secular from as well. An opaque world of time and space. Opaque just meaning you can't see through it. Blocking the passage of radiant energy and especially light, exhibiting opacity. Also, hard to understand or explain. So, opaque is a good and a word for it. Opaque as in, like, you can't, it's thick, it's dense. Like we never know what's coming in this world. Of time and space, in which humans could not know anything about the end, not when it would happen, not how it would happen, not who would be saved. So yeah, it's very fascinating. Obviously, like, I wouldn't agree, probably dot for dot, word for word with Augustine. Well, actually, no, I suppose I would agree with this statement. I was thinking, like, not how it would happen, right? There's Bible verses that kind of say how it would happen, but I think that what he might have meant, although this is a Britannica article, it's not Constantine talking himself. So I'm not trying to, go too far with this. But, not when it would happen. Jesus did say that, not how it would happen. We don't know how the kingdom's coming, like how it's being fulfilled. We know that it is coming, and from a post-millennial perspective, it is coming. And this article does mention that, how it essentially mentions how I need to read this, actually, medieval and Reformation. It essentially mentions how so I almost finished. No, I didn't. Okay, so it essentially says how, like, Augustine's view has proved to be true, essentially because while people around him were either believing that the Roman Empire was a fulfilled kingdom, or that that Jesus was about to return, like, right around the corner, and the apocalypse was now, kind of thing. Well, on the one hand, almost 2,000 years 1,600 years has passed since that time, where all this debate was happening, and that apocalyptic zeal, people still have it, but Jesus still hasn't returned. And that's the discussion that I'm going to try and make in this series, is that, a lot of these verses that talk about the coming kingdom are not about a like a kingdom that can be pointed to and seen. I take, sort of that verse that Jesus says about how the kingdom, maybe I'll bring it up in a minute, but can't be pointed to or seen or touched. I take that meaning when you view like the verses about, New Jerusalem and things like that, because what's the kingdom if it's not the New Jerusalem and the new temple? Like that wouldn't really make any sense. God's kingdom only ever existed through Jerusalem and his temple. Not only ever, obviously, actually, yeah, you do have like the tent, the tabernacle, and like, before they were in Jerusalem, there was still the kingdom, but that was the end of it, was, the established temple, the established hill of Jerusalem, and the new temple and the new Jerusalem is, the perfected version of that. Okay, just getting my thoughts. I would like to find the mention in this article about how I think I'll just read here because it seems like this is it. Indeed, his notion of saeculum, whence comes the English word secular, see that's how I learnt that, I read it in this article, radically desanctified history, presaging modern thought on time by almost 1500 years. So this is cool, desanctified history. So it's like, it separates the kingdom of God from history. It's cool, it's a cool thing. The separation of the spiritual and the material kind of thing, which is cool. Augustine anticipated no imminent supernatural intervention in history. His imminent or realized millennium at once acknowledged and embraced history, but it also argued that the battle that really mattered had already been fought on the spiritual plane where God had triumphed. Satan had been reduced to lordship in this world, the city of the world and the city of God had been forced to coexist. Eventually, even that small patrimony that Satan claimed would be taken from him and God would triumph. I'm trying to read the point in the article that oh yeah, here it is. Part of what makes Augustine so compelling to every succeeding generation is that he was right and the apocalyptic prophets were wrong. The world did not end. Augustine's historiographical millennialism, big words here, continues to inspire people with its rigorous agnosticism about where history meets its end. Humankind just cannot know. According to this Augustinian approach, we must be prepared at all times, but we must not abandon our daily tasks. There's a little cute thing, which I don't really understand, so I'm not going to read it. So yeah, that's Augustine's view. There's more that I could read. Actually, I will read it. So yeah. So this bit talks here about how it does say that this theology of history, adopted from the Donatist theologian Tychonius, offered Augustine a means to attack both of eschatology's most troublesome aspects. Now, the Donatists, I think, were a heretical group, but Tychonius, even though he was a Donatist theologian, the Donatists actually, they excluded him because he had views that were more orthodox, but the Western Church also excluded him because he was more Donatist, or he was associated with the Donatists. So he ended up dying I think a pretty lonely guy, which is pretty sad, but maybe, I don't know if he died a lonely guy, but like he was, kind of excluded from both sides of the church around him at that point, which was a little bit sad, but anyway. So, yeah. So this theology of history, adopted from the Donatist theologian Tychonius, offered Augustine a means to attack both of eschatology's most troublesome aspects. He could refute the notion that the signs of the end can be read in the people and events of history, example, the Goths and Visigoths as Gog and Magog. He could also remove Christianity from its theocratic identity with the Roman Empire. No earthly institution could be pure in the terrestrial city. So that's cool, and that's again what I was saying, like Christianity from its theocratic identity with the Roman Empire. So people were believing at that time. I can't imagine what it would have looked like when historically as a Christian that everything sucked as a Christian in the Roman Empire until Constantine, and then all of a sudden people are like, well, that means now Roman Empire is the kingdom of God, yeah, Augustine was, I think he heavily or intensely disagreed with that, but he also disagreed that the signs of the end can be read in the people and events of history. So I'm going to make the case at some point that, well, I don't know how much I will, because I think I'm taking more of a philosophical route to this than a historically exegeted approach, a historically, explaining all the biblical passages through an interpretation of history. Although we'll go through some of it, but mine aren't going to be about applying the signs of the end to people in history more than the Bible lets us. And so, especially with mostly in reference to the time sensitive biblical verses. So things like, this generation will not pass away until, like I say, all these things are fulfilled. Because Jesus said that to the generation at the time, his disciples. So he's saying the generation, your generation, as in the generation of the disciples, which was in 2000, years ago in the first century AD, wouldn't pass away until like the things he was saying were fulfilled. And people will interpret that a bunch of different ways, but it's mentioned a few different times and in a couple different contexts too. So it kind of points to the fact that, well, maybe there's more weight to it being at that time. Let's continue reading. This was a particularly important argument to make after the sack of Rome in 410, when, at least in its western region, many believed that the empire had collapsed. So, at the same time, he could decouple millennialism from future expectations, because a millennium was not a future time of perfect peace on earth, but rather a time already begun, with the establishment of the church, a time of perfect peace in the heavenly city. This is very deep. I need to actually read the book, because I haven't read the book. But again, this is essentially what I believe as well. A time of perfect peace in the heavenly city. This stupendous exegetical achievement would dominate ecclesiastical commentaries on Revelation for the next 8 centuries, and most formal theological discourse through the Reformation. Which is cool, because it's saying that, Augustine's view, which I really like Augustine's view, probably because it's sort of similar to my view. It would dominate ecclesiastical commentaries on Revelation for the next 8 centuries, and most formal theological discourse through the Reformation. And then the Reformation, obviously, well, not obviously, I don't know why I say obviously so much when it's not obvious to probably a lot of people, but the Reformation began mostly with Luther in the 15th century, going into the 16th century. So from, I think, and beginning like 1450-ish, 1470-ish, ending 1530 with Martin Luther, Zwingli, and you have another guy whose name John Calvin, but he comes, I think, in maybe the 17th century, maybe earlier, maybe in the 16th century still, but and then of course you have I think the Puritans and stuff, which come in the 17th century, so like 100 years after the Reformation. So in the 1500s, and then the 1600s, you have the Puritans in America. Puritans, the 16th and 17th, or 16th and 17th century. So you have, while the Reformation is happening, you have a group of English Protestants who wanted to reform the Church of England and separate it from Roman Catholic practices. So the Puritans are the English reformers. And I think the Puritans are the guys who then went to America and started America. The United States of America in North America. Sometimes I forget that there's a camera looking at me when I go for these breaks. But then eventually, I'm not sure why, because I think, you have Augustine's view would be a pretty amillennial view. Also, wait, I'll just put this here to show you. I just searched up Puritans and show you what I was reading. Just the first thing that comes up. The Puritans. I was reading this top bit. There's a Britannica article. I love the Britannica. let's move this back. Can I do this? Can I just hold this microphone? I suppose I can. It's my it's my podcast. Um, so maybe I should get a mic that I can hold. So um, I really need to end this. It's getting too late. It's a Tuesday. I need to go to bed. Oh, hello, Joe. Why didn't that pop up for me? Oh, because I had it too low. Hi, Joe. How are you? To end this, let me end this by finishing what I was talking about. Oh yes. Essentially, you have what seems like a very amillennial approach to amillennial. Oh, okay. Let's tackle this now. What do these things mean? So premillennial, amillennial, postmillennial. So like we talked about earlier, the millennial or millennium is the 1,000 years that's talked about in Revelation. So maybe I want to do things to like show stuff, but like I'm just like don't want to do too much because it gets quite a lot. Okay, let's go 1,000 years in the Logos software. So let's turn off this one. There we go. So reign 1,000 years. Can we get to Revelation, wherever that is in Revelation? All passages, Revelation. There we go. So there's a few of them. Blessed and holy is the one who shares in the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years. So we've got 1,000 years, right? Another one. And he sees the dragon and the ancient serpent, who is the devil and the Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. Another one. Threw him into the pit and shut it and sealed it over, so that he might not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were ended. 1,000 years, 1,000 years, 1,000 years. So a lot of this stuff, that's what is being talked about when the millennia and things like that. So the millennia, 1,000 years, right? Premillennial. So then, what is the prefix, right? The pre, the R or the A, and the post. So pre-millennial is Jesus will return at the start or before the millennial reign. Pre-millennial. Amillennial, the A is what's called a negation, which I don't actually understand English terminology and stuff. I've just heard enough people talk about it that I can repeat it. Essentially means in the negation, it's the absence or essentially you can look at the A as like it's like you have a theist, someone who believes in God. You have an atheist, someone who doesn't believe in God. So I don't think it would be fair to say that our millennials don't believe in the millennial. They just don't believe in it as necessarily something that is like tangible or like physical or actually a literal 1,000 year time period. Generally, people who are amillennial, they kind of view it as a spiritual reign, kind of like what Augustine was talking about. And then post-millennial is like Jesus will return at the end of the millennial reign. And that's kind of what Augustine, what was being explained in that article with Augustine. I can do this and this. And then go back to that. Yeah. What was it? The sort of the church was a fulfillment of the millennial in the, and in the city of God, kind of So, I'm pretty sure I've missed some stuff, but it's getting late and I'm losing my train of thought a little bit. So I'm going to finish up. Yeah, that's a little bit of Augustine's beliefs. But yeah, so Augustine, I'd like to highlight the specific point about Oh no, I'm not even in Augustine. Where's Augustine? Further down. Here it is. Um, yeah. So, um, the millennium was not a future time of perfect peace on earth, but rather a time already begun with the establishment of the church, a time of perfect peace in the heavenly city. Remembering that the heavenly city and the earthly city are different. Um, so, yeah, it's pretty cool. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. So yeah, that's a bit about Augustine. Now, for to end it off, I'm going to do something, um, hopefully fun. So now we're going to talk about William Lane Craig and Richard Dawkins. So Richard Dawkins, if we don't know, is this guy. I think the late Richard Dawkins. So he has passed away now, but he was the famous new atheist. So the um, famous, there was a Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, the famous, in the early 2000s, the people who their whole, all they did was talk about how bad religion was, and specifically Christianity. They didn't really talk too much about Islam, which is interesting. Why would they not have done that? But yeah, we talk about William Lane Craig and Richard Dawkins. So Richard Dawkins, we just explained who he is. William Lane Craig is a philosopher. Um, he does a lot of apologetics. Um, and he's very, very, he's one of the people who talks. He believes in the general consensus, scientific consensus on evolution, for the most part, but also believes it's perfectly reconcilable with Christianity. And he does a lot of debates with atheists, and he's very big in in the sort of new apologetic, the scientific apologetic, within philosophy, within science, about how a lot of these things, like scientific theories and evolution and things like that, are let me fix this, are perfectly compatible with Christianity, and how a lot of them actually point to there being a God. And then once you come to the conclusion that there is a God, then you have to decide, well, which God? And he has also like arguments for Christianity, because if you have a God, then necessarily that God then becomes a personal God because of the way humanity is and the way human consciousness is, and the earth and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty fascinating. But so Richard Dawkins again was debating everybody with a hat that said Christian on it. He, well, maybe, okay, that's a far point, but he was, pretty much going around debating all like the priests and the cardinals and the bishops and stuff. While William Lane Craig at the same time was debating a lot of the heavyweights of atheism and secularism and stuff like that. And yeah, and so William Lane Craig was a heavyweight in the theistic Christian atheist debate, or the debate, stage. And Richard Dawkins was obviously a heavyweight in the same, same area. And yet, William Lane Craig constantly was pressing Richard Dawkins to debate with him, but he wouldn't do it. And to the point where Richard Dawkins wrote an article for The Guardian titled "Why I Refuse to Debate with William Lane Craig." So this article right here was written by Richard Dawkins himself. And it essentially talks about how he goes on. Now, again, the new atheists were really, really good at rhetoric. And rhetoric is essentially, we can Google it, rhetoric. Oh. So rhetoric define, oh, wait a minute. So the art of effective or persuasive speaking or writing, especially the exploitation of figures of speech and other compositional techniques. So the new atheists were really good at rhetoric, so really good at debate. Not so much. There's a in Justin Briley's podcast. There's people who talk about how they didn't really like the new atheists because they didn't really go much into evidence and about like deep into philosophy. They just kind of called everyone who didn't believe what they believed stupid, which isn't a very good argument. But yeah, so he essentially just goes on the article talking about how, William Lane Craig parades as a philosopher, but nobody knows him. Perhaps he is a theologian. Yeah, Craig has been increasingly importunate in his efforts to cajole, harass, or defame me into a debate with him. I've constantly refused in the spirit, if not the letter, and that's a Christian, I think a funny poke at Christians maybe, but of a famous retort by the then president of the Royal Society. That would look great on your CV, not so good on mine. Now, it's funny when he talks about this stuff, but like, he also says, this Christian philosopher is an apologist for genocide. I would rather leave an empty chair than share a platform with him. And he kind of takes this high horse approach. Like, again, like, I don't know. It's funny how he says, like, nobody even knows who this guy is, yet he's like trying to harass, defame, and debate with me, and like, you know what I mean. But a lot of people, like even Alex O'Connor, who's he's a famous atheist. I don't think he's atheist anymore, but he was a famous atheist, new atheist. Now he's a famous Gnostic who, he critiques Christianity a lot. But he was like, well, why won't you debate him, kind of thing. Like, he kind of called Richard Dawkins out on it. But essentially, I just thought this article would be funny because Richard Dawkins goes on to critique William Lane Craig. He talks a lot of stuff about him and how he bullies him and stuff, but he talks about like how he's doing so much debating such Archbishop of York, 2 archbishops of Canterbury, many bishops and the chief rabbi, and the present Archbishop of Canterbury. So, but he talks about a bit about how Craig defends the Bible, right? Because the Bible has some very very intense stories about what now people debate if it is genocide or not, depending on but when God like calls in the Old Testament to when Israel is warring with other nations, he calls them to go and just kill everything, kill all the men in a conquered city and to seize the women, children, and livestock as plunder. And then certain cities, which the Lord God gives, save nothing alive, but destroy everything. And then he begins to talk about, you might say that such a call to genocide could never have come from a good and loving God. Any decent bishop, priest, vicar, or rabbi would agree. Essentially what he's saying is any decent religious person would agree that the Bible itself is wrong, and that the God of the Bible... So essentially what he's saying which is funny because it's the whole rhetoric of the new atheists, you can't be religious and believe in religion, and be a good person. But there's so much to that because what they're saying is that first they get to define what a good person is, and a lot of what they say is a good person is coming from a Christian foundation anyway, like I was saying before about how people are made in the image of God and therefore everyone deserves a right to life. And then he says you can't be a Christian, a bishop, priest, vicar, or rabbi. You can't even be like a Jewish religious person and believe that the God of the Bible, who claims to be good, is actually good because he did these things which aren't good. And so he's saying if you're a decent religious person, the reason you're decent is because you deny the very thing that you're supposedly believing in, which is crazy because it's any decent religious person isn't even religious. They're an atheist, and it's pretty crazy. And again, that's the thing of the new atheists. It was a lot of rhetoric as in the arguments were essentially if you don't believe what we believe, well, then you're immoral. And it's like, well, what are your morals? Like, where do they come from? You believe that it's wrong to kill innocent people. Okay, well, where do you get that from? You believe it's wrong to imprison and enslave. Okay, where do you get that from? You believe that people have inherent human dignity. Okay, well, where do you get that from? And so it's interesting that they take these assumptions which didn't exist, and still don't in a lot of countries, um, and exist effectively to a degree in certain countries, but most of the countries that take these rights have them because of Christianity. You know, places like Switzerland, Sweden, America, Australia, England, Germany. Um, you know, like a lot of the Western world, the places which were most influenced by Christianity, have these as fundamental parts of their morality and their philosophy. And he's just assuming them, and then goes to talk about how um, William Lane Craig is a horrible person, and he won't debate him because he defends um, the biblical accounts of genocide, which again, like, it's kind of that thing of like Christianity doesn't exist without a genuine, true belief that Jesus did actually rise from the dead, because it would have disappeared if people weren't willing to die from it and to preserve not only Christianity and the traditions, but the actual text itself with their very lives and blood. You know, it doesn't exist as a philosophical fun time, deep, but not really true text. It like it never would have existed, and it doesn't exist. And the same thing, it doesn't exist without the Old Testament. And you're talking about, you know, the whole history of Islam and the Islamic Empire, and the Islamic Caliphate, and also, you know, the Turkish Empire with the Ottoman Empire, the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, um, the Anglo-Saxon Empire, or, you know, whatever, I don't know if you call it an empire, but, you know, the Babylonians, the Persians, the who else do we have? The Sumerians. Pretty much any culture in history has um, practiced all these things. And it's Christianity which gave us something different. And to apply the standards we have now, and I get it, I get the point, but it's just, I do find it slightly amusing. Um, and again, like, I could get into it, like, because I've grappled with these things, you know, as a good Christian, I think you're meant to read the Bible and not go, okay, I'm just going to accept this because I have to. I think it's good to be like, well, how can we defend this as a Christian? And then I think it's good, you know, and that's the same thing with the whole Genesis debate on the young Earth versus the old Earth, on evolution versus intelligent design. You don't necessarily have to pick one or the other. And again, that's something that, you know, some people might be viewing this and um, they might completely disagree with me and think I'm compromising on my faith by saying that. But I think it's a very beautiful thing to be able to say, you know, what I think Augustine said: all truth is God's truth. I've heard that quote attributed to Augustine, but essentially, if something is true in the world, it is true because of God. Because God, ultimately, if you have truth, you know, I think it's because God is true. And yeah, and so, like, if something is objective, and ultimately exists, it's because God has given it to us, and He's given it to us to study and to know and to exist. And so, yeah, I think that's cool. And again, I have grappled with these verses of genocide and things like that. That's not the type of discussion I'm trying to get into now. I would be happy to talk about them, my view on them, if anybody wants me to do that. Because I have read the Bible and grappled with these things and thought to myself too, like, you know, how could a loving God command this kind of stuff? But, you know, I understand it, and especially when you understand kind of what, you know, I think we sometimes apply what the modern world looks like, what the modern Christian influenced world looks like, especially with like, when you live in America, Australia, England, or any of really the Western world, and then applying the same standard which Christianity's given us to the ancient world. When, okay, not only was it a different time for the kingdom of God, but it was a different time for the nations that God is talking about. So these other nations, again, this is a time where atheism didn't exist. Monotheism was weird because people worshipped a plethora of gods. But you have people, a lot of these nations which God is devoting to destruction, sacrifice their own children to gods and things like that. And not in just like, you think about that, we can't even really picture what it's like, but it's a very bloody, a very dark, a very destructive way of, like slowly burning babies to death. And not only babies, but your own babies, like your own children, because you genuinely believe that it's going to grant you financial freedom or financial power or fertility or political power. And then, if you take the whole biblical account of itself as, God isn't just some dude, but he is the God of the universe who is seeking to reconcile this broken and fallen creation back to himself, and not only were these nations doing these things, but they were also fighting willingly against God's chosen people. And it's a thing of war, but also of God establishing himself, but also of God reconciling his creation to himself, and judging, if he is God, if he is just, right, he not only has a right to judge, but he has to judge, because sin can't go unpunished. If he's a holy God, and he can't just let some people sin and not let other people sin, it all has to be judged. And that again is the message of the Christian message, is that because all sin has to be judged, you need an ultimate savior to save us from the sin, so we can be in fellowship with a holy God. And that is the message, the Christmas message, or the Easter message of Christ's death and then resurrection. He died in our place, not having to die, but he died that we would live through him. If we believe in him, we are entered into Christ spiritually, and then one day physically. So it's a good way to end it, the Christian message. But yeah, so I thought it's just a really funny thing about Richard Dawkins' moral grandstanding over William Lane Craig, but on a foundation that comes from what William Lane Craig believes. So yeah, and now that's going to be the end of the video, everyone. So again, I'm sorry that I don't put it on full screen when I'm just talking about stuff and there's like me in the corner while there's an article there. I'm working on it. I'm getting used to this stuff. But thanks everyone for watching. Genuinely, like if you have watched it up until this point, I'm amazed. Thank you so much. I hope that you got something out of this, whether you're a Christian or not. Again, this is meant to be a video series on eschatology and the end times, but I kind of talk about a bit of everything. That's why it goes for so long. I can't even get one episode done. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed. I genuinely hope you enjoyed. Do we have any more comments? No. I genuinely hope you enjoyed and got something, even if you didn't get anything, you disagree with me on things. I hope that you liked it. And yeah, God bless everyone. Thank you for watching again for the 6th time. And yeah, hopefully I'll make another video at some point and it'll be even better than this one. Next video, I will actually start going into some Bible verses and going through the scriptures and how, because this is a biblical debate. It's not a philosophical debate. It is, what has God revealed to us through the Holy Spirit, through the inspired text written by not only the apostles, but the prophets, and the disciples of the apostles, specifically like Luke and Mark. And yeah, just what is it? Where does it come from? Because it comes from the Bible. It can't come from anywhere else. It comes from the teaching of the apostles and the prophets who prophesied the things to come. So it's therefore the Bible. Now, what is the Bible actually saying? That's hopefully what we're going to next time. Thank you everyone for watching. If you watched this is a 1 hour and 50-minute video. They're getting a little bit too long. I'm sorry. But yeah, genuinely thank you at the bottom of my heart for watching, and God bless. See you next time.